Welcome to Cape Town, where we are driving the new Audi Q8. In this review, we're telling you what's new, and we're also going to say whether it's any good or not. But before we start, if you want to see lots more reviews like this, subscribe to our channel and go to whatcar.com for a great deal on your next car. So the Audi Q8 has been around since 2018, and if you're not familiar with the car, then the number in its name gives you a clue as to where it sits in Audi's lineup and how big it is. Yes, so because it's a Q car, it means it's an SUV, like everything else with a Q in its name in Audi's lineup. So you have the Q2, Q3, Q4, Q5, Q6, Q7, and then there is this, Audi's flagship SUV, the Q8, which sits at the top of the lineup above everything else in terms of price and prestige at least, but this isn't actually bigger than the Q7. In fact, it's a bit smaller. So essentially you can think of this as a Q7 with a bit of the roof chopped off the back here. Now Audi wasn't the first brand to think of this idea, so that means that the Q8 is going to be up against other alternatives that do a similar thing, like the BMW X6, the Mercedes GLE Coupé, and also the Porsche Cayenne Coupé. Now we've always known the Q8 to be a very good SUV that essentially takes all the good bits of the Q7, but with a bit less rear headroom and a bit less boot space as well. So what is new with these updates for the Q8? Well, you can see on the outside there is a very slightly refreshed exterior design up front and at the rear. So you have a different grille from before, and as standard you get a body coloured surround for it, but this particular car has the black pack, which makes it look like this. You've also got Audi's new two-dimensional badge on the nose of this car, which we first saw actually on the Q8 e-tron. And if you do want to find out more about the Q8 e-tron, then click on our link at the top of the screen to watch our full review. Anyway, back to this Q8, where there are three new exterior colours to choose from. There's Sakhir Gold, Ascari Blue and Chili Red. There are also 5 new alloy wheel designs as well, ranging from 21 inches in size up to a massive 23 inches. You also have new reworked HD matrix LED headlights. So in the previous Q8, this LED bar used to run along the bottom of the headlight, but now they've moved it to the top. There are also 4 different light signatures you can choose from, which you cycle through on the infotainment system. And at the rear, there are new OLED lights, which are also thinner than they were before. And there's also a new safety function, where if you are stationary and a car is approaching you, then if it gets within 2 meters of this car and it doesn't look like it's going to stop, then the rear lights light up to alert that driver of your presence. Now, to give you some context for how subtle these updates are, these new headlights are probably the biggest change for this new Audi Q8. Now, inside there are 3 new trims you can choose from for certain bits of inlays in the interior, but apart from that, this is identical to the Q8 interior that you had before, which is no bad thing, to be honest, because it's always been a very, very good interior in the class that this is in. So, to remind you of what you get in the Q8, you have a fully digital driver display, which Audi calls the virtual cockpit, which is really, really good because it's big, it's configurable, it's easy to see, and the graphics are quite nice as well. On the center console here and dashboard, you've got 2 screens. This top one is your infotainment system, which, just like before, is responsive, packed with features. You get Apple CarPlay and Android Auto as well. Now down here, this screen is dedicated to your climate controls. Now, the point to make is that physical buttons and dials are a better solution than this because they're much easier to use and less distracting, particularly while you're driving. However, by the standards of touchscreen climate controls, this is pretty good because it's permanently visible on this big screen, and also because it's haptic, you do know whether you've pressed something or whether you haven't. So it could be better, but it could also definitely be worse as well. And in terms of overall quality in here, well, this is still a top-notch SUV interior, both in terms of the materials that are used and the actual build quality. Everything feels really solid, very luxurious. You can spend a lot of money on a Q8, but this feels like an expensive interior. Unfortunately, if you like the trim in this particular car, as I do, this is an Audi exclusive trim, which means it takes much longer to build if you're buying it from new, and also it is rather expensive as well. Now, there haven't been any changes to the dimensions of the new Q8, so that means in terms of practicality, the new car is exactly the same as the old one. So that means in these rear seats, really, it's very impressive back here. Normally, a sloping roofline does wonders for a car's looks, but it also spells disaster for anyone tall sat in the rear seats. But that has never been the case with the Q8. So ultimately, yes, a Q7 is a bit more generous when it comes to rear headroom, but you still shouldn't have a problem in the Q8 unless you are especially tall. Rear legroom is also very, very good, and it's nice to stretch out and relax back here. You can well imagine that this is a particular car which is going to drive around a lot of VIPs in its lifetime. And to that end, there is even some ashtrays in the back here, which feels a bit old school. If you want a 7-seat version of the Q8, then you can't get it. This is 5-seat only. If you want 7 seats, you need to go for the Q7 or something else. Now, again, because of that sloping roofline, the overall storage capacity in the Q8 is less than what you have in the Q7, but still, at 605 litres, this is still a big and practical boot. If you want even more space in this, then you can push the rear seats forwards, and if you do that, it increases the overall capacity to 680 litres. But with the rear seats as far back as they'll go, before this facelift, we were able to fit 8 carry-on size suitcases into the boot of the Q8. So it will be exactly the same for this facelifted model. And that is more than you can fit in an X6, but a bit less than what a GLE Coupé can manage. If you want even more space than that, then what you can do is fold down the rear seats flat, and helpfully they split fold 40-20-40 as standard, which essentially means you can fold each of the 3 rear seats down individually. The Q8 engine lineup is pretty much the same as it was before, so that means there's a 55 TFSI, which gets a 3-litre V6 petrol engine, and there's a 50 TDI, which gets a 3-litre V6 diesel. There's also a performance-focused SQ8, which gets a 4-litre V8 with 500 brake horsepower. And we're also expected to see an update to the RS Q8, which will have even more power and be even quicker, and that's expected to join the lineup sometime during 2024. Audi has, though, got rid of the plug-in hybrid options for the Q8, and actually it did that before this facelift. That's because it wasn't able to build enough to meet the demand that it was getting, so it temporarily took them off sale. But we have been told to expect them to come back into the lineup in the future, potentially with bigger batteries and longer ranges. Now, there have been no mechanical changes whatsoever to the Q8, so that means, as you'd expect, the driving experience is exactly the same as it was before. And like the interior, it doesn't necessarily matter that there haven't been any changes, because this has always been a good SUV on the road, and the engines are just as impressive as they were before. We're in the 50 TDI, which is the 3-litre V6 diesel, and it's a really peachy engine, a very, very nice fit for this car. You get 285 brake horsepower. It'll do 0 to 62 miles an hour in 6.1 seconds, so it's certainly quick enough. And it's punchy, powerful, but it's also really refined and hushed as well. And really, no matter what engine you choose, a real strength of the Q8 is its refinement. So whether you're on the motorway, whether you're around town, whether you've got a diesel engine or a petrol engine, things are very quiet and very calm in this interior, which is good because, as we mentioned, this is probably likely to spend a lot of its life ferrying around VIPs in the back. So they can rest assured that it will be very quiet inside the Q8. And it will also be comfortable as well. Just like before, you get adaptive air suspension as standard, and this is a comfortable SUV. The only thing is, though, the smallest alloy wheels you can get, as we mentioned, are 21 inches, which are enormous, and they're the smallest ones. And typically, the bigger the alloy, the less comfortable the ride. So it does mean that there is a kind of underlying firmness to your progress in the Q8, which is obviously more pronounced the bigger the alloy that you go for. But it's still not enough to make this uncomfortable. In terms of handling, there hasn't been any changes to the suspension setup or the steering, so it's the same story as before. There's nice heft to the steering weight. It's pretty accurate. There's not much body lean through corners. It's competent and it's assured, but it's not particularly fun or engaging. Of course, not many SUVs are, but if that's what you're looking for, then a BMW X6 is still better in that department, not that it's amazing. A Porsche Cayenne and the Cayenne Coupé are in a different league entirely when it comes to handling dynamics. If there is one major weakness on the road for the Q8 though, it is probably the 8-speed automatic gearbox that every version of this car comes with. And the problem with it is really its response time when you want a sudden burst of acceleration. So if you're on the motorway and you want to make a quick overtake of the car that's in front of you, then when you put your foot down, there's a real noticeable delay before the gearbox works out what it's doing, wakes up, and then changes the gear for you. And it really is quite frustrating, particularly because the engines that come with this car are so good and so powerful, but they just feel a little bit hampered with that sudden burst of acceleration because of the gearbox. The actual shifts themselves, once you're on the move, aren't a problem at all. They're very slick, quick, smooth, but off the line, it does feel a bit lazy. Still, everything else about the Q8 on the road is really rather good. In the UK, the new Q8 trim lineup is S-Line, Black Edition and Vorsprung. But no matter which version you go for, this is not exactly a cheap car. But then the rivals that this car's up against aren't exactly bargains either. So, hardly anything has changed, but then hardly anything needed to change. The Q8 has a great interior that's spacious and nicely finished, and it has a strong lineup of engines. If you have a big budget and you want a big coupe SUV, this should definitely be on your list. Thanks for watching this review. If you want to see another one, then click there. And if you want to get a great deal on your next car, go to our website, whatcar.com, by clicking there.